Good afternoon. It's so wonderful to be here and to collaborate with Asia Society to have this very important event. I'm Jindong Cai. I'm the director of U.S. China Music Institute at Bard College Conservatory Music. And I just want to say a few words about our institute. About more than 5 years ago, with Leon and my other colleague in the Bard support, we created the U.S. China Music Institute. And we partnered with the Central Conservatory Music. And after we created the institution, we have focused on 3 things. One is open the degree programs for Chinese instruments. So now we have an undergraduate and graduate program on Chinese instruments, including erhu, pipa, guzheng, guqin, all those instruments. And you can get degree from it. And all the students were taught by the professors and in the Central Conservatory Music, either in live and online. So this is the first such program in the West conservatories. And we list them just like every other instruments, you know, piano, violin, erhu, pipa. And the purpose is to exploring music, Chinese music to the West. And so far now we have about 25 students, and like I said, in both undergraduate and graduate level. And then the second thing we did is we created China Now Music Festival in Bard campus and also in New York City. And in this festival, we have done 5 years. This is 6 years. And we mostly introduce music from contemporary China, including traditional music and contemporary music, especially to introduce the contemporary composers from China today and their works, and also performers. And so this is the second one. And like this year, we have 2 major programs. One we did on Monday and Wednesday. We created Bard East-West Ensemble. So this ensemble is including a string quintet plus 7 Chinese instruments and 3 percussion instruments. We hope this ensemble will create a new way of making music, and also can be signature ensemble for the U.S. China Music Institute. And then we have an orchestral concert we did last night at Bard College, and tomorrow afternoon we will perform in Jazz at Lincoln Center's Roth Theater. And for this symphonic concert, we mostly introduce contemporary composers from China. And this year, we designed the program to explore 3 generations of Chinese and American composers. Start from Zhou Wenzhong, who is the first Chinese-American composer that established his career in the mainstream in the West. And then their students, Chen Yi and Zhou Long, today is sitting in the audience, their work, after they came out of China, studied at Columbia with Zhou Wenzhong. And then the 3rd generation, after Chen Yi and Zhou Long graduate, they started teaching in the University of Missouri in Kansas City. And they nurtured the next generation of musicians from China. And that's including Zhou Juan and Li Shaosheng. So those 2 young composers' work also going to play in tomorrow's concert. And those 2 young composers now went back to China very actively in Chinese music scene. So the festival has been really successful. And that's why we also have some discussion related each festival. And this year, this is what we plan to explore how music takes important role in U.S. and China relationship in the past, and we're looking to the future. So then the 3rd element of the U.S. China Music Institute is academic activities, that including annual conference on Chinese music or teaching Chinese music in the West, and every year we have a that kind of conference. So today, in the past few, I would say in the past 5 years, I think U.S. and China relationship has some obstacles, especially politically and economically. And many of us are worried. But if you look back to the history, and there's so many connections we made through music. So music had been playing important role, and I think it's going to continue to play important role. And this year I remember personally, 1973, when the Philadelphia Orchestra visited China, and I was a teenager. And because of that, I decided I want to be a Western violin musician. And later on, I decided I want to be a conductor. And then I decided to come to America to study. And then I become a conductor, and I settled in America, but I doing concert in America and in China, and to promote music from both sides. And so I think it's, myself is the product of the music relationship between U.S. and China, and that's why I feel we need to, it's our duty to continue to nurture and to keep on this wonderful direction. So we will hear our panelists today to discuss about history, about the now, and about the future. So that's what we going to do for this panel discussion. But before we start, we want to hear some music. So luckily enough, we invite a wonderful P-pop player from the Central Conservatory Music, Liu Xiaojing. So she's going to be featured for tomorrow's newly recommissioned the new P-pop concerto to perform in the Jazz at Lincoln Center. And she kindly agreed to play 2 pieces for us. One is called 春江花月夜. So to translate, it's the spring, river, flower, and moonlight, and the night. So that's 5 words. It's all related to scenery. It's a beautiful traditional piece. And the second piece we're going to play is by Chen Yi. It's called Points. So now let's enjoy our first section, P-pop solo by Liu Xiaojing. everyone knows that's a Chinese instrument, right? But actually, pipa originally come from Silk Road, from the West, from Persia. And the other day when I had another concert, I said, for violin family, actually, they came from East. So you can see the violin basically, also come from Arabs, and there's origin, and you can trace back to that region. Then went to Europe, went to northern Italy. Then you have Amati, you have Stradivarius, and then the other way around, Persian and introduced some pipa-like instrument and came to China, changed the shape, changed the repertoire, and become pipa. So you can see West and East has been communicating through music. So, and the next, it's really our honor to introduce our special guest, came from the Central Conservatory of Music just last night, and Hongmei, and she is the chairwoman of University Council at Central Conservatory of Music. And she and I have been friends forever. And at the beginning of the idea to create something with Chinese instrument in America, that's how we started. And so would like Ms. Yu Hongmei to make her remark. Thank you.
Distinguished Dean Botstein, Professor Cai Jindong, Professor Chen Yi, Mr. Ginstling, Mr. Schell, and dear guests, good afternoon. First, thank you for the very kind invitation from the Bard U.S China Music Institute. Today, I'm extremely happy to talk to you about advancing the friendship between China and the U.S. by means of music culture exchange. The Central Conservatory of Music was established in 1949 by the State Council of the Central Government of the People's Republic of China as a higher education institution to train professional music talents. It was originally the only national key art college in China. In 2017, the conservatory was selected as a double first-class university, a new designation for the top educational institutions, representing the highest level of education in China. The Central Conservatory implements complete curriculum development in all degree courses and enjoys the highest reputation, both domestic and international. Exchanges between the Central Conservatory of Music and American music institutions are now frequent and important. Looking back in history, as early as November 1977, with the approval of the state councils of both countries, CCOM signed an exchange agreement with Columbia University School of the Arts. This was the first cooperation agreement signed between Chinese and American cultural institutions. Academic exchange is an important way to promote academic development and cultural exchange between countries. Its implications are broad and far-reaching. The Central Conservatory of Music has signed a cooperation agreement with many important music schools in the United States, such as the Eastman School of Music, Yale School of Music, and the Manhattan School of Music. This agreement allows us to carry out multi-level academic exchanges, such as faculty visits and students exchange program, and promote academic development between China and the United States. In 1987, as the first Chinese symphony orchestra to perform abroad, the China Youth Symphony Orchestra of the Central Conservatory went to a successful performance tour of 9 countries in Europe. In 2017, following the traditions of opening up to the outside world, the Central Conservatory established the Chinese Music Composition Center, Performing Arts Center, and the Article Research Center. Since the establishment of these 3 major centers, there has been much advanced in global perspectives. Following the creative spirit of facing the world and the future, they approached the construction of modern Chinese civilization as a privileged responsibility. They have promoted numerous outstanding contemporary music works and have visited Lincoln Center and Carnegie Hall for multiple performances. On November 24th of this year, Carnegie Hall will host the world premiere of symphonic music pieces composed by artists of the Chinese Music Composition Center for the 2nd time. China and the United States certainly have different history and cultures, as well as social system and development paths. Universities are not only pioneers of cultural exchanges, but also promoters of the development of bilateral relations. The U.S. China Music Institute has pioneered and lovingly built by the Central Conservatory of Music and the Bard College Central Conservatory of Music. It is a cradle for musicians who have a global mindset and are proficient in Chinese music. It is also an international bridge connecting the music fields of China and the United States. Over the past 5 years, the 2 schools have jointly established a dual degree program in traditional Chinese music and humanities. Together, they have held the annual China Now Music Festival, conducted annual academic seminar related to Chinese music, and performed a Chinese New Year celebration concert in New York. And we continue to achieve fruitful results in cooperation. Through our joint efforts, the U.S. China Music Institute has grown from taking root to bearing fruit. In particular, in the past 3 years, the U.S. China Music Institute has not only overcome the impact of global COVID-19 epidemic, but has expanded degree program from 3 to 9. It was become an important academic base for demonstrating traditional Chinese music teaching achievements in the United States. In March of this year, the Central Conservatory of Music and Bard College Conservatory of Music signed second phase cooperation agreement, relying on its now comprehensive and diverse teaching and academic advantages. The U.S. China Music Institute has implemented master's program in Chinese music and culture that has just begun enrollment, striving to cultivate cross-cultural talents. 3,000 years ago in China, there was a famous piece of Guqi music called High Mountain and Flowing Water, which expressed the preciousness of friendship and peace through music. Civilization is more colorful through communication, and culture is enriched through neutral learnings. Looking towards the future, I firmly believe that the educational and the cultural exchanges between China and the United States, especially music and culture exchanges, will continue to develop. The exchange of music and culture will add positive energy to the development of bilateral relations and to the continued genius of friendship between the people of China and the United States. So, thank you very much indeed. I'm much looking forward now to listening to the insightful views of my esteemed American colleagues. 谢谢。
Thank you so much for coming today. And we have far right, Orville Schell, you all know, and has been connected to China in the half century or say, right? Yeah. And Gary Ginstling, and he is the president and the CEO of New York Philharmonic. And thank you for coming. And Gary has been working in the symphony orchestra world for many, many years. And he will tell you something about what the New York Philharmonic has been working with the Shanghai Symphony and with all different kind of projects. And Chen Yi, you already know, and a really wonderful composer, and now teaching at University of Missouri in Kansas City. And Leon, my boss, from Bard College. And I think the most important thing is his vision to create the U.S. China Music Institute at Bard College Conservatory Music. Sometimes I always say, you know, and if not him, that this will never happen. Yeah. So I'd like to start with Orville. And in the past 5 years, U.S. and China relationship have been in kind of a rocky side, right? There are lots of obstacles. And politically, economically, there's a lot of those conflicts. And so what I want to ask you is, where are we now in music?
Well, I have a microphone.
Yeah.
Great to be here with you all. Thank you, Jindong. Thank all of you for being here. Where are we? You know, I'd have to say we're at a pretty parlous, difficult moment in our relationship with China. And I adore classical music, and I do think it is one of the last areas where we can all sort of comfortably enjoy something together. Indeed, maybe play in ensembles together. But I think it's also important to remember that music is not always the perfect way to interact better. And let me cite just two little occasions, sort of the yin and yang of that idea, that music is a refuge, but it also can be a place where people disagree. We were in China a number of years ago with Yo-Yo Ma and a whole group of cultural figures, and we were in a meeting, as many of you who've been to China will know, where you have the stuffed chairs and the high-ranking official, in this case, Liu Yandong, the only woman who's ever been on the Politburo of the Chinese Communist Party. And she was going on and on and on. And I turned to Yo-Yo, and he was sitting next to me. I said, "Do you have your cello with you?" And he said, "Yeah, it's down in the car." So we sent a guy down to get his cello and brought it back up. And Yo-Yo had brought with him this wonderful black dancer called Lil Buck, who was a street dancer from LA, and he was there. So as the speeches went on, I just said, "Hey, listen, let's stop a minute here. Let's have a little music." So Yo-Yo started sawing out the swan, Saint-Saëns' swan, and Lil Buck got up, and he started dancing. And it did this wonderful dance, and you could see a movie of this on YouTube, Lil Buck Goes to China. And after he finished dancing, it was so sort of magical. Liu Yandong, this Communist Party official, jumped out of her chair, ran over to Little Buck, and kissed him. I said, "Okay, bingo, you know, that's the magic of music." Now, on the other hand, we have occasions where I went to the Vienna Philharmonic a year and a half ago, just after the invasion started. Valery Gergiev was supposed to be conducting. The very last minute, he got defenestrated, and Yannick Nézek-Séguin came in, and it was an all-Russian program. And at the end of the program, I think they were playing Tchaikovsky's Six at the end, he kept his baton up and his hands up. And I've never heard such a moment of silence in Carnegie Hall as at that occasion. And everybody knew what the silence was about, in opposition to Putin's invasion of Russia. And then when he lowered his hands, the place exploded. So this is only to say that music can be used for many purposes. I hope we can use it constructively, but it also is a way to say something that other people may not want to hear.
That's right, yeah. Thank you. And Leon, when the first time I met you was actually at Stanford. You came to give a lecture, and I was teaching and conducting there. You gave lectures about the music relationship, it's culture and architecture, right? It's about like Mendelssohn, Wagner, and Stravinsky, Sibelius, how their music actually relate with the society and changed or influenced. And I want to ask you the question is, in the past, you know, we created, in 2017, we created U.S. China Music Institute. And in the past 5 years, you probably heard more Chinese music than ever before. And, and also, you were in China in the past June and conducted Shanghai Symphony Orchestra and with American program, right to Copland Symphony No. 3. I was there and to see the wonderful sound came from this orchestra. And you were the first American conductor actually conduct the Chinese orchestra after the pandemic. So my question to ask you is Chinese music. What do you think of the Chinese music, what I call invasion to the Western classical repertoire or Western music society in general, how that will influence Western culture? Or what is the 21st century, the new music and new classical music scenes should be?
So that's what's called an easy question, right? So I want to go back to something that Orville said, and also that we just heard from the pipa and your music. The interesting thing is that instrumental music has, to all of us as listeners, meaning, but it's indeterminate. It's more fungible than language, language is not clear anyway, but music is far more indeterminate. So every listener, every player, every performance is different, and the meaning that's constructed by the player and by the listener is not totally controlled by the intention of the composer. And not only that, as Béla Bartók understood the Hungarian composer, as who was an ethnographer, was a scholar of folk music origins, he had this idea that all of the folk music came from a common source, similar to your story of the string instrument. When you listen to the pieces we heard, you can have evocations if you're a listener that comes purely from the West. You can hear things that remind you of Spanish, Mexican, Hungarian uses of these string instruments, and of the pitches, and of the five-note scales, and of the flourishes and the melodic line. And you can make up your own story to it, whatever the composer's original story was. In that lies the attraction to music and its claim to universality. It slips through your fingers. The same music can be used for certain political purposes and the other. So the famous case is the Beethoven Ninth Symphony, which was at the fall of the wall and for Hitler's birthday. I mean, two seemingly totally opposite political ends. From my point of view, China is the most important place for the future of the so-called Western classical tradition. If you go to the Central Conservatory and you listen to musicians play, they're not playing Western music, they're playing music they have made their own. To us, it may be the Beethoven Violin Concerto, it may be Stravinsky, who cares what it is. But because it's instrumental music, even if it has a vocal line, it's appropriated by the player and by the audience. It has different meaning than if you play the same thing in a place in Germany. The other thing is that music is the ultimate transgressor of cultural appropriation. No composer has ever paid attention to the ethnic origin of what they used. It attracted them, so Max Bruch, the German composer, set a Jewish liturgical melody, the most important to music. He was an anti-Semite, he wasn't even a Jew. But it became hugely successful. And so what I'm saying is that the appropriation, what we see now among American composers and among Chinese composers, is an eclecticism, an attempt to merge or adapt what they hear and the sounds. We heard a concerto with Western instruments and a pipa last evening, a very wonderful concerto. We combine those instruments. And I think that's for the good because, last thing I'll say is that I'm a real believer in the cultural exchange through music with China. And not because I believe music is not political, but I think the experience of music, both in one's home and in the public sphere, is actually the only way to bypass politics. So that is to say, to give voice to people individually that bypasses the political effort to constrict, both in the United States and in China, our own freedom of thought and independence of thought. I think music, especially instrumental music, from both traditions, is the last island of freedom, of individual self-expression that is out of the reach of any political system, our own here in America or in China. So if you create collaboration and exchange, we're playing a long-term game for what we share in common as human beings, whether we be Chinese or American or European. And I'm a believer in that ultimate universality. And the only way to get there is through a medium that isn't language, isn't images, but is something whose meaning is always utterly elusive.
Well put. Thank you so much. I feel exactly the same way. And I will say in the past, maybe hundreds or few hundred years, and Western music went to China. And in our book, my wife and I wrote, Botstein read, we went back to 1601 when Matteo Ricci, Li Mado, came to China, present the emperor to a clavichord court. And that's what we say is that Western music became, entered China. And through those more than 400 years, you see how China now gradually become a classical music powerhouse. But on the other hand, you see that's a one-way street, go to there, right? And I would say, and maybe we should have another way around to let the world know more about what's happening in China, in music world today.
Yeah, Jindong really deserves all the credit, fantastic credit, for creating the first effort to balance by bringing the Chinese musical tradition and its instruments to Western students. As you say, for generations, the Western has been taught in China. But exact your point, you know, when we did the Copeland Third in June, both in Shanghai and Tsingtao, that I don't think anybody in the audience had any idea of the political context of that symphony from the 40s, from the Second World War, completely. They invented some other story that fit this music, and it changed its valence. But in order to do that in a real relation with China, which is the dominant powerhouse in so-called classical music, the teaching of Chinese instruments and Chinese musical traditions to Westerners is an essential thing that's lacking here.
That's right. Yeah, and I think, and if you go to a Chinese conservatory, and to go to Chinese conservatory, you can see talented violin players or piano players, but also same time you can see the talented pipa players, erhu players. And I always say China never had the period, you know, like a Mozart, Beethoven, Mahler, and never had that environment to create composers like that. But if you talk about 21st century composers, I would say many, many composers, like Chen Yi, Zhou Long, Tan Dun, all those composers, actually, they're in the really upfront of a contemporary music scene around the world. So now I want to ask Chen Yi and to say, what do you think about you know, the music exchange and for your work to be heard in the world, how that's important? You know, as you went through the history, it's like kind of like in my life. You're early and born in China, and then actually during the Cultural Revolution, you were sent to the countryside to play the violin in the Peking Opera Troupe, right? And
when
then,
I was a farmer.
When you was farmer, yeah. And then after the Cultural Revolution, and when the Central Conservatory opened, then you were among the, like one of the first composers in this very famous class in 1978, right? And then now, then you followed Zhou and Zhou to come to Columbia to study, and then you established your career in America, and composing, and your work have been played by I will say, every major symphony orchestras. And so I want to really hear from your experience, how the music exchange is important.
Wow, that is a great question, because in my class, many of us have been trained as classical musicians. Before the Cultural Revolution. We started very young as a violinist and pianist. But during the Cultural Revolution, we all became farmers, as you know, in my generation. But after that, I think that we enter the Central Conservatory, in my case, which is one of the top conservatories in the whole country. Not only the Western traditional classical music training, but we have received the systematic training of the Chinese traditional music. I thought that played a very important part in my creative life, because not only the instrumental music, but also the operatic theater and musical storytelling, and all these components would become the new language which would be shaped. And I thought that it brought us back to our traditional roots. And for me, because I grew up with classical music, at this point when I was a teenager, I became very deeply loving my countryside music. For the first time, I went to farmers, and I learned that we had the same tradition. We had the same language and the same customs, everything. And then went through this education system. I came to the States because we heard Professor Zhou Wenzhong's music when he was the first American composer who brought in a lot of records and scores to donate to Central Conservatory and Shanghai Conservatory libraries, and to introduce Western music among several composers and professors. And then we follow his step, because the first time I heard this Chinese song written in atonal, and all this new language with a new discovery, I could say. And then we earned our doctoral degree from Columbia University. And I also worked in the Center for U.S. China Arts Exchange when Professor Zhou established the center, which brought in a lot of Chinese delegations in arts exchange and education exchange. And then I became a resident composer of the Women's Philharmonic in San Francisco, as well as Chanticleer, which is the only full-time choir in the States. You may know that I have done a lot of community work and education works, from which I learned the culture and the education system in the States. I try to bring out more my original language from what I have learned, and then I could have a new creation with my own language. And that also is the experience we have been doing in the last 3 decades, I could say. We also have an ensemble in New York called Music from China. We have done all these competitions for compositions written for Chinese and Western instruments. But I thought that Bard College has done a great job to promote this kind of cultural exchange and education, because you set up the orchestra along with the Chinese part, traditional instrumental part, and you also establish an ensemble called East-West ensemble that can combine this as a kind of a fixed form, or a certain, we should say, some kind of, not so flexible, but a fixed form that could train students and also could introduce the culture more easily and convincingly. Like in your education, you also got degrees from playing Chinese instruments. And that is something very important for us to bring in people together to share ideas. Because for our music, I thought that, because Leon was right, the musical language is somehow abstract. You said that. Yeah. And when it's abstract, you related that with history, with other art forms, right? But at the same time, you can speak from your native language to understand, and you could share with others. And from my case, I would say, I would share my ideas from my music as a dialogue, as a communication. And then we could share ideas. And eventually, after the communication, I thought that is very helpful for the improvement of the peace of the war, because you understand each other much better from the sharing.
Thank you so much. That's exactly, we definitely have a comment on, definitely we want to do the musical exchange, right? And so this will be continued. And also between musicians, we will have a wonderful friendship between American musicians and Chinese musicians, and so on. And I'd like to ask Gary, question is, as a leader of the major art institution, music institution, of course, we all want to do the cultural exchange. But for you, may you have to overcome many of those political or organizational or such, dealing with the government or those kind of situations. And I know you have been, the New York Philharmonic have been doing this in the past, and also you're planning to do more in the future. So I'd like to hear what you think about this.
It is so interesting, right? Because we do like to think that music stands apart from politics. And as Leon and Orville were speaking earlier, I'm thinking about, music starts in this amazing ecosystem between composer, performer, and audience who are receiving the music, right? So there's the moment of creation of the piece, and at that moment, I think we have to acknowledge that of course music and all the arts are political. They have to be political because it's about the lived experience of human beings who are creating music at a particular point in time in his or her life. They are experiencing life, so music has emotions of happiness and sadness and death, and could have religious, spiritual connotations. It could have overtly political connotations. So, of course, I mean, the arts are inherently and intensely political. I think they have to be. And in fact, I was thinking, just as an example, the New York Philharmonic's program this week. So music of Beethoven, Steve Reich, and Schubert. Sounds like in a brochure a wonderfully balanced orchestral program. I don't think anybody would think about politics when you think about a program like that. But if you look a little closer, the program starts with the Beethoven Emperor Concerto, the great piano concerto with the wonderful Norwegian pianist Leif Ove Ansnes. And if you know anything about Beethoven, you would know the one thing he would be horrified is to think that we're calling his piano concerto the Emperor Concerto, because he was such a humanist, and we all know the story about his Third Symphony. When Napoleon declared himself emperor, he scratched his name off the score, and what a powerful political statement at the time. And then we moved to this new piece that Steve Reich wrote for the New York Philharmonic called Jacob's Ladder, inspired by the Old Testament. The text is in Hebrew, and he's telling the story of messengers and angels climbing the ladder between our world and heaven. What could be more intensely powerful? And when I think about that, so that's for me, and I think you could probably almost look at any musical program and come up with an understanding of how music connects to the real world. So then you get to the questions you were asking about, the New York Philharmonic and the performers, the recreators of that music, and how we approach using music to build bridges and form cultural exchanges. From the New York Philharmonic standpoint, that has been a part of the orchestra's DNA for as long as it's existed. Toscanini took the New York Philharmonic to Europe in the 1930s. Leonard Bernstein took the New York Philharmonic to the
Union.
Soviet Union
Exactly.
in 1959. Zubin Mehta took the New York Philharmonic to India. Of course, many of you know that the Philharmonic went to North Korea in 2008, a remarkable moment in cultural diplomacy. And now we've had a relationship in Shanghai with the Shanghai Symphony and Shanghai Conservatory dating back to 2014, where we are coming not only to perform, but to collaborate and train young orchestral musicians. And so the Shanghai Orchestra Academy, which is now training dozens of Chinese musicians in the art form. It's a commitment that the Philharmonic has made. We haven't been back as an orchestra since COVID, but this summer the orchestra did travel to Taiwan and Hong Kong to perform, and then I did go on to Shanghai with a small group of musicians to reignite our relationship with the city and with the Shanghai Symphony and the Shanghai Conservatory. I was able to speak at the commencement ceremony for the students graduating from the Shanghai Orchestra Academy, and we are absolutely planning on bringing the orchestra back next summer, the full orchestra back to Shanghai. And Orville started us off by talking about the challenges that the United States and China face, but I will say that we have gotten nothing but encouragement from our colleagues in China and our colleagues in the U.S. government, and who have been incredibly supportive of our commitment to coming to China, and have said the same thing, which is, you know, now is the time more important than ever that we have these cultural exchanges because so little else is happening. So it is the last vestige of keeping the lines of communication open, and so it was very meaningful to be there this summer, and I can't wait to go back with the full orchestra.
I heard from my friend Yu Long, and you're co-commissioning oratorio or cantata, and it's based on Jewish musicians in 1930s and 40s in Shanghai. How that is going?
So this is a great example, right? So there's, of course, the obvious example of cultural exchange is touring and visiting other locations, but this collaboration is really to create a new piece of music, right? And it is intended overtly to tell a historical story, an important historical story that we believed, and as did our collaborators in Shanghai, has not adequately been told about how Jewish immigrants in the 1930s were fleeing and being turned away from country after country, but were welcomed by Shanghai. And so by 1941, I think over 20,000 immigrants were welcomed into Shanghai. And this is a piece that's being commissioned by an American composer, deliberately, Aaron Zigman, and an American librettist, Mark Campbell, but working very closely with Yu Long and our counterparts in Shanghai. And so the piece will have its premiere. It's an oratorio, so there are singers and a chorus. We'll have its premiere in Shanghai next month in November, and then the New York Philharmonic will give the United States premiere at the end of February 29th at David Geffen Hall.
Wonderful, that's great. And we did a similar thing, but the other way around. In 2019, the U.S. China Music Institute commissioned Zhou Long to write a cantata, but it was commemorate 150 years of Chinese railroad workers to help Americans to build transcontinental railroad. Yeah, so that was really, it's also, you can see this cultural exchange. So we did that, and Zhou Long and I, we went to the Sierra Mountains to look at those railroads. It's how difficult to build. And then in the end, we performed in Carnegie Hall to start the world premiere. Then we took the orchestra force to Stanford to perform at Stanford University. So it's just like what New York Philharmonic is doing. It's really, those kind of inspiration events actually inspired musicians to write something, to start from Beethoven, right? So I want to ask either Leon and Orville, do you think of music actually eventually can influence politics?
I'll leave the last word to Orville on this one. But I want to introduce a little controversy. So let's talk about the Shanghai cantata. So the Emperor Concerto, yes, there was the Beethoven who struck Napoleon's name, but he also the Beethoven who wrote Wellington's Victory and sided with the alliance against Napoleon and had conservative, pro-monarchical views already from his childhood. But the whole point is many of us who learned the Emperor Concerto, right, as musicians, right, playing in an orchestra, had no idea growing up that it was about emperor. We didn't know why the name, we didn't give a damn. And the worst piece of fascist propaganda in music is Karl Orff's Carmina Burana, the most famous and popular now piece. Most people who sing it and cheer for it have no idea that it was designed to undergird a pure Aryan audience. It was written for a purged audience in a totally racist way to please the public. It lost that sensibility. And when we went on tour with the Conservatory Orchestra, we did a special concert in Shanghai of the composers who lived in that Shanghai compound. Jacob Avshalomov, for example. It's a great thing to do. It's a great story to tell. But for me, the story goes to your question. Ultimately, we are all victims of politicians. I may pull a lever for one side. I think Orville knows what lever I would pull in the United States, clearly. But do I think they're a necessary evil in a way? Politics is an essential thing. But people, our human life, that the communication between people, people-to-people diplomacy, if you will, that's what music can do without easily falling into the trap of collaboration with that you don't agree with, right? Because the meaning is so indeterminate. So I think, yes, I think this is one way of being optimistic in a time where being optimistic intelligently is increasingly difficult.
Leon, if I may say, playing music together doesn't just automatically create friendship and love and peace and harmony, but it certainly is a way for human beings to share something. Here's my proposal, and I'd be curious to see what you all think. The APEC meeting will be held in November in San Francisco. Xi Jinping is probably going to come, and Biden will be there. Wouldn't it be a great thing if Xi Jinping would bring the Shanghai Symphony or the Beijing Philharmonic or whatever, and we brought an orchestra, and they started their discussion by having two orchestras play together, then they got out on stage, gave each other a hug, and then they went into negotiations. Now, wouldn't that be a good way to kind of just lower the temperature a bit?
That's a great idea. That's a great idea.
Will you get right on that, Jindong?
Yeah, I mean, if you take Chu Wenchang, for example, your teacher, was also the teacher of Tan Dun, also the teacher of Joan Tower.
Yes.
Right.
So his progeny are not only Chinese,
Right.
but American without Chinese heritage, and Ardeen, that doing something like that, what they would play would represent the collaboration between two cultures.
I think, even I remember there was a story during the Cultural Revolution, and this Shanghai Symphony Orchestra conductor, Lu Hongen, and he disagreed with back then that the authorities said, and Beethoven need to hear our socialist ideology. And then he said, no, and the people need to hear more Beethoven. Yeah, so that's what I think, maybe the politicians really need to hear more about the music.
Well, I have to say that, and Leon, I think what you just outlined, sort of, most people who hear the Emperor Concerto don't know anything about Beethoven's complicated history, is for me actually precisely what makes music so fascinating. Because actually there's so much to learn I mean, these pieces do have history, and they do have historical context. You know, there's a wonderful new book by Jeremy Eichler, who's the critic of the Boston Globe, called Time's Echo. And it looks at 4 pieces of music that were written post-World War II, and it explores basically how music is serving as a memory of what happened in World War II. So 4 pieces: the Strauss Metamorphosen, Schoenberg Survivor from Warsaw, the Britten War Requiem, and the Shostakovich Babi Yar Symphony. And you know, I remember, it's a fascinating book, I highly recommend it, but just in talking about the Strauss Metamorphosen, which you could hear in a concert hall, not know any of the context around it, and be moved to tears by this piece. But you know, he poses the question that Strauss was you know, addressing a metamorphosis that happens somewhere after the tragedy of World War II is in the rearview mirror. But he specifically says, you know, the piece lasts, and the question of what that metamorphosis is no longer Strauss's, it's ours to own, and we get to determine what that is, and everyone will have their own interpretation of it.
That's right. So music can serve in any kind of a social.
Yeah, I mean, it's a fascinating question because you struggle against the erasure of the context. Strauss was a Nazi collaborator. He wrote it toward the end of the war, and it was about, for him, the end of Western civilization. To reinvent the piece is our privilege, that's exactly right. But I do think that the intention of the composer, of the moment of creation, as you suggest, doesn't control what happens. It flies out of the hands, more than a novel would, or a painting even. But I think there is the great thing about music also, live music. We haven't talked about the performers, watching the pipa performer, the beauty of the performance and of the sound. That no performance, that's why recording and YouTube and all that isn't music. And I think you said it. Yeah. Music is the public space. It's one of the few places, I think, Orville, you mentioned it, where people get together in real time, in real space, and they share something as strangers which binds them together without being uniform. They're not cheering at the last goal in a football match, so you know which side they're on, right? You don't know why they're cheering. Even the person you bring to the concert has maybe a different sense of what happened in the experience of music. So it's a very special, collective, social, as well as a private experience simultaneously.
You know, as you point out, Leon, music is abstract enough, even though it may have an origin. I mean, if you listen to Beethoven's Fidelio, well, it's all about human rights, but it is just in its abstraction a glorious piece of music, so that it allows a piece of music to be repurposed beyond its initial source of inspiration by the composer itself.
I once did a concert in a country I won't name where I didn't speak the language and knew nothing about the folk tradition, and there was a suite of folk music in it, which I didn't understand the titles or anything, but I learned the piece. I go to the rehearsal, and we do a couple of concerts. At the end of the first week, the concertmaster comes backstage and said, we had a wonderful week, and the orchestra asked me to tell you that the opening piece, which you somehow, I don't know how you did this, but figured it out in tempo, was like a funeral march. But you ought to know, in our country, it's a wedding march. So, yeah. But we thought, instead of telling you after the first rehearsal, we thought, this is sort of interesting. It's a little different piece. It works, you know. We wouldn't do it that way, but you're a foreigner, you'll get away with it. We will have some fun as opposed to playing it the way we're used to playing it. But you can repurpose, that's the whole, yeah.
I think my experience is this, and every time when I rehearse with the orchestra now about Chinese program, and I can see the difference. On the first rehearsal, you can see the players have some questions, have some kind of a unadjustable, this kind of different sound. They didn't really, I can see that not necessarily everyone liked it. But after a few rehearsals later, when you got the performance, suddenly I feel like everyone feel the music makes sense. Yeah, and then they start to accept it. And then they perform just like there's some of those turns, some of those styles. It sounds like Chinese musicians to perform. So I think that's what the music can transform and to connect the people. Yeah, so I think we'll share this definitely view on that. And I'm sure we are all continue to work on this front. Thank you so much. And I want to, maybe there's 5 minutes so we can, and if anyone have a question down there, you can ask our panel and see, or specifically who you want to ask. If there's
a musical close to this, is there not?
That's right. Yeah, and
don't go away.
Yeah, don't go away. There's a duet going to perform. Our pipa player to come again to have a duet with a cello player. Yeah. Okay. Anything?
Maybe I'll ask Orville, what would you program for the Xi concert in San Francisco?
Gary, that would be a wonderful conversation.
The Emperor Concerto.
Oh, there's actually, Orville, I want to ask you this. There more, even political situation has been so intense, but both governments always say we have something can be doing together. For example, the environment. Right? I know you have a big event coming, so would you share that? Maybe you can think about what we can work with China on that, musically.
Simply to say that I think, at least for me, one of the biggest challenges on the planet is climate change. So we're going to do a concert at the Armory with the Oxford Bach soloist, Reggie Mobley, a black countertenor, and staged by Peter Sellers, to, as you may know, Bach wrote a chorale, Wach it auf, wake up. So we're going to call the whole series Wach it auf. Let's wake up people to climate change. So this is going to repurpose Bach, although he didn't know anything about climate change, because Bach is all about mortality. He's all about the fragility of life and making the best of it. And so anyway, that is a way we will use music to try to get people to pay attention to something that the composer had no notion of.
That's great. Yeah, and you will continue to do that. And I went to the Ice and Cold exhibit. That's actually, I can see those relationships between China and America, what it can do, right? And then Gary, the Philharmonic is going to continue to go to China, and Yulong still coming here to conduct the New York Philharmonic. Yeah, and Chen Yi, your work will be, you work on both sides, right? It's definitely, and Leon will continue to go to China to conduct, right? Yeah, see? I think we can end with today's panel before the last performance, end the panel with a very positive note. Wow. Thank you so much.
Thank you.